Okay, so now let's switch gears a little bit to talk about purpose and need. And for this, you should refer to part 2, chapter 1 of the PD&E manual. So let's talk about the project description first. It is used in the PD&E study and should be similar to the one used in the ETDM process. The project description briefly describes the existing facility and existing conditions. It includes the project limits, the project location, and the proposed improvements such as modes in typical section, facility type, multimodal features, major structures, so that the lead federal agency, also the resource agencies and the public can understand the scope of the project and its effects on the environment. The identification of logical termini should be completed during the planning process and also finalized throughout the ETDM screening. For federal projects, the determination of logical termini is coordinated with the OEM during the programming screen when the purpose and need is accepted. So for the alternatives developed for CEs, EAs, or EIS, these must include these three important aspects. So first, they must connect logical termini and be of sufficient length to address environmental matters on a broad scope. They also should have independent utility or independent significance. In other words, be usable and be a reasonable expenditure, even if no additional transportation improvements in the area are made. And lastly, they should not restrict consideration of alternatives for other reasonably foreseeable transportation improvements. And this is pursuant to 23 CFR 771. So the purpose and need for a project is the basis for the development of the range of reasonable alternatives required in an EIS, or environmental impact statement, or the identification of build alternatives for other class of actions. Moreover, the purpose and need for the project assists the lead federal agency in evaluating project alternatives and selecting the preferred alternative. And for this, suggest you look at part 2, chapter 3 of the engineering and of the PD&E manual, titled the engineering analysis. Okay. FDOT and planning agencies such as MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations and TPOs, transportation planning organizations, identify transportation needs during the development of their respective transportation plans based on planning data. The initial purpose and need developed during the planning phase or ETDM screening may be refined during the PD&E study if new information or needs are identified. If the purpose and need changes during the PD&E study, OEM must be made aware of this change, and OEM must agree to the proposed changes before they can be incorporated in the environmental document. The purpose and need in the environmental document is where the planning process and the PD&E process, NEPA in the case of federal projects, most clearly intersect. The development of purpose and need begins early in the planning process and evolves into the final purpose and need in the PD&E study. Okay, so this little graph here, I thought it was cute, just to show how the planning and the PD&E processes end up in the environmental document. I think it's pictures speak more than 1,000 words. So there you go. So on the purpose should be broad enough to encompass a reasonable range of alternatives for an EIS, but it should not be so broad that it encompasses every possible alternative. Okay, so it identifies the primary goals of the project, guides the alternatives that will be considered and developed in response to the established need. And like I said, it should be broad, should not be so narrow as to preclude a range of alternatives. And then the need serves as a foundation for the proposed project and provides the principal information upon which the no-build alternative discussion is based. So next, I'm going to mention some items or some considerations that may assist in the discussion of the need for the proposed action. And this list is, of course, not all-inclusive. With the exception of the project status, the remaining elements are not applicable in every situation. So project status being the first one, and the discussion of the planning status of a project documentation should be included. Briefly discuss the actions taken today, coordination with other agencies, governmental units, and action pendings and schedules. Then there's the system linkage. Should discuss how the proposed project fits into the existing and future local, regional, and state transportation system, and contributes to the movement of people, goods, and services. Also should discuss how the proposed project contributes to the multimodal transportation network. And capacity. So discuss what is the projected transportation demand, what capacity is needed, what is the level of service for existing and proposed facilities. Transportation demand should discuss how the project would accommodate traffic demand forecast, projected population, employment growth, and increase in freight movements. Then on the list, legislation. If applicable, that must document the needs to respond to federal, state, or local government requirements. Also, social demands or economic development, where projected land use changes are discussed, social and economic traffic generators. Then there's the modal interrelationships, where if there's a need to address other modes of transportation and how the project would interface with other modes. Also, safety. This is where the 5-year crash history takes place. So we include here a discussion of the existing crash rate. Also, it compares to the state average, the type of crashes and all that kind of stuff. And then lastly, at least on this list, the roadway deficiencies. And in this case, we can incorporate discussion of substandard geometrics, load limits on structures, and in the case of a bridge replacement project, inadequate typical sections, poor pavement conditions, drainage conditions, and inadequate CIS roadway design standards. Okay, so next, here's a list of the statements that should be included in the purpose and need during PD&E. So it should state the purpose of the transportation problem, or statement of the transportation problem, rather. It is not a statement of a solution, such as specific project alternatives. It should be based on articulated planning factors and developed throughout planning process. Also specific enough so that the range of alternatives developed will offer real potential for solutions to the transportation problem. It should not be so narrow in definition or so specific as to predetermine a solution. May reflect other priorities and limitations in the areas, such as environmental resources, growth management, land use planning, and economic development. And it should not list specific design criteria or standards to be met by the project. And it also should arise from deficiencies, issues, and concerns from within the project area. All right, so that's all I have for this part of the presentation, and I believe we have plenty of time for discussion, and we will take questions now for whichever this section or the discussion from earlier this morning. Pete, Ruth, is there another? Okay.
There are a couple questions that you can probably hit on. And we've had people in the chats responding as well, but some of them were, maybe you could just elaborate on the meaning of significance, because maybe there's a lot of folks on the call or are participating in this training that don't have a good understanding of what significance means.
Okay, give me a second.
Maria, you doing it in the chat?
Christine, can I open up your mic so you can address that one?
Sure, yeah, I can jump in on this one. Significance is a term, it's in the NEPA regulations about determining the magnitude of an impact, and it's going to depend on the context and the intensity of the impact. In fact, it's a lot of things come into play to help determine, if the impact is significant or not. And for state-funded projects, you're more looking at things that are substantial rather than significant. But it's really a determination that's made on how those impacts are substantial, and it's not really just the district making that determination. If it's something that, you've got a project that's going to have like major impacts on a particular resource, then there's also coordination with OEM that occurs to determine if it's significant. Like a significant impact would cause a federally funded project to be an environmental impact statement, but you could have like a SEER that could be at that level, or it could have lesser impacts and be at like a EA or a type 1 CE level as well. So the determination of a significant impact isn't as necessarily as important for a state funded project as it would be for a federal project.
And then Christine, since you're on, there's a few questions about independent utility, if you don't mind addressing that.
I might need a little help with that.
I can take that one.
Sure.
On independent utility, it is important that the project can be functional on its own. In other words, you're not leading a roadway is not leading to nowhere. And this is true especially for a new alignment. Another example would be an interchange, right? We don't want to build interchanges that lead to nowhere. So there's got to be a need, a reason for the project, and it should be when it comes to the logical termini, you must make sure that or at least evaluate that the potential project is not going to negatively affect the adjacent limits. In other words, you don't want to, for example, you don't want to build widen to 6 lanes or to 8 lanes when you're going to connect back to a 2-lane road, because you would be creating a bottleneck and you know, a lot of other issues. So I hope that that helps clarify the logical termini question.
And then Maria, there's probably another one you could get, which is comes from Doug, and it's, can we talk a bit about a strong purpose and need statement? I'm frustrated by many purpose and needs that talk about what the project will do, not the problem that needs to be addressed. The purpose and need should be a sales pitch that impresses the reader why a project is needed.
I like the sales pitch terminology. Yes, Doug, and I'm glad to see your name there. Right, the purpose and need should not lead to the necessarily to the selective alternative, but it should depict, if, for example, if there's safety concerns, if there's safety issues, a lot of crashes, that should definitely be part of the need. So in that case, a need would be safety, and the purpose would be to address those safety issues. Another example of let's talk about a combination of a purpose and need, right? Another example would be a capacity project. So let's say the level of service currently is, I don't know, level of service F. And that definitely shows that there's a capacity issue there. And there could be some other issues based on found on throughout analysis. But those are the type of issues or needs in a project that you need to somehow describe and use, like using your own words, Doug, like using it as a sales pitch to justify the project. So a project, it should not be just because we need to go in and repave, so let's go ahead and widen. That's not a right purpose and need or justification for a project. So we have to be mindful of having the right purpose and need, having the right issues, or identifying the issues in a project, and therefore documenting them properly, because that's going to help lead the analysis in the project. I hope that helps answer your question.